funeral is about to begin, sir. I've been waiting for you. Boy. You play a good game, boy. But the game is finished. Now you die.
Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Angus Scrimm. All right, before we get started with this, I want to turn it over to Adolfo Dorta and Rick Laura.
Hey guys, I don't want to take up too much time, but we wanted to go ahead and do this for quite some time. We've been wanting to start a series of awards where every show we honor a horror icon that's really meant a lot to us, as fans, but also, you know, they put on the most memorable performances in horror and in film and really impacted all of us in this room. And originally we were thinking about kicking it off in LA and then again in Indianapolis, and now we finally have the chance. There was one person and one person alone who we deemed would be the right one to start it off with, and that's Mr. Angus Scrimm. And well, taking up too much of his time because I'm sure that whatever he has to say is worlds more interesting than whatever we have to say. But I wanted to go ahead and present to you, Angus, this award from Days of the Dead. We consider you to be one of the greatest icons in the genre, and so we wanted to go ahead and give you a little something to show you our appreciation and everything that you've meant to not only us, but every fan in this room and fans all across the world. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up.
Well, I'm deeply touched to have that new companion to keep me company now, and I think it's taken this long to catch up. They just said they were going to give it to me in LA, and then they were going to give it to me in Indianapolis, and now we finally met and got together, and I couldn't be happier. Thank you so much for this. I want to tell you what a joy it is to meet all of you at the signing table. Just one of the great pleasures of my life lately to get to have this contact with you and to say a few words. I only regret that we can't all spend half an hour talking, but the lines are long, so we're lucky we can grab 2 or 3 minutes. But it's just been such a pleasure, and you're all so warm and welcoming. Thank you.
Well, it's definitely an honor to be sitting next to you, Angus, and we want to talk a little bit. Before your acting, you were a writer. You were a journalist, you wrote liner notes. Talk a little bit about that portion of your life.
About writing liner notes, yes. Oh, well, let's see what happened. My brother-in-law, Giles, came by one Sunday and said there was an ad in the paper, sort of a blind ad for somebody to write about music. And he knew I loved writing. So I answered the ad. It turned out to be Capitol Records. And they had me do a sample note. That was the information on the back of the LP jackets. At that time, later, of course, the booklets and the compact discs. And I wound up, they hired me, I wound up doing that sometimes on staff in that big round Capitol Records tower near Hollywood and Vine, and sometimes as a freelance writer for over 30 years. So I must have written thousands of notes for all their great artists. When I first started writing for them, they had Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Peggy Lee, Judy Garland, Dean Martin, Jackie Gleason, Joe Stafford. They had a roster of terrific artists. And I was able to go to some of the recording sessions, which was great fun. Ella Fitzgerald came in later. And then I switched to writing classical notes and got to work with people like Itzhak Perlman, the virtuoso violinist, who's a wonderful guy, and Chris Parkening, the brilliant American classical guitarist, and Andre Previn. Anyway, it was a fascinating place to be, and wonderful associations. I still have a great affection for the company, even though it's not quite the presence on the market that it used to be. And I don't write liner notes anymore if I can avoid it. 30 years is enough.
You were nominated for several Grammys and actually won a Grammy. Tell us about that.
I did. Yes, I had about 6 nominations, and I actually won a Grammy for a classical album called, well, it was actually the violin concerto of the great movie composer Eric Wolfgang Korngold, who scored all the Errol Flynn action pictures. And then when he finally decided he wanted to get back to actually composing serious classical music, he had stipulated at Warner's that he retained the rights to all his music. So he used some of the gorgeous themes he had written for Errol Flynn pictures as the themes of his concerto, his symphony, and other works. And it's the most ravishing violin concerto you'll ever hear. Anybody who loves beautiful music, whether you're a classical music fan or not, would adore that composition. So you have a record library or someplace you can run across that, pick it up and play it, and it will send you into some other kind of sphere. Just listening to it, it's so beautiful.
So you studied acting at USC under William C. DeMille, brother of Cecil. Talk about working with him and some of your experience at USC.
William was the older brother. He had, he was from they were from a theatrical family. Cecil B. and William C. DeMille's father was Henry C. DeMille, who was a playwright in New York, quite a respected playwright who turned out one box office hit after another. As boys, I think they acted a little bit. I know William had studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, which was the great acting school in the United States at that time. And then Cecil went to Hollywood and became a legend out there almost immediately, and wrote his older brother and said, "Come out, this is where you belong." So William went out and started directing, did a number of classical films that are remembered. Miss Lulu Betts was the title, it was very popular in the silent film era, and became one of the first presidents of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. But he disgraced himself. He was married to the daughter of the great economist Henry George, and all Hollywood revered his wife, the daughter. And William fell in love with his screenplay writer, Clara Barringer, and left his wife for her, and was immediately a pariah in Hollywood. They would have nothing to do with it. So he fortunately had an offer from USC to go head up their theater department, and did so. And I was actually attracted to that university, particularly by his name. And he turned out to be the most delightful old fellow by the time I got there. Just, we all adored him. We called him Papa. And I got to do a number of plays with him. Gosh, I go on forever, don't I?
You spoke about your theater act a little bit there. So you've done both theater and film. What do you find more challenging? What are the unique challenges for both?
Actually, I've never done Broadway. I've done local theater in Los Angeles, and of course, many college plays and high school plays. In fact, in grammar school, I was the hit of the third grade. I love being on the stage. It's awfully consuming. I'm not crazy about rehearsing. You have to rehearse 2 to 4 weeks every night. Then when you get on stage, of course, you're without your script. It all has to be up here in the head, so there's all that memorizing to do and to remember. And occasionally somebody forgets a line, and everybody freezes in terror until somebody thinks of a way to carry out. Motion pictures are great because they're almost immortal, and your performances aren't lost. There they are for people to go on enjoying again and again. Look at the Phantasm phenomenon. We made a little film in 1979, which we had great fun doing over the course of a year. It took us more than a year to make that film. And then it came out. When it did come out, it just blew the doors off all over the world. It was the #1 hit in Paris, France, for the summer of '79. Can you imagine that? Intellectual Paris, France. That was their top movie that summer. And then all over the United States, it was a big hit. And I don't think it's ever been unavailable. I think whenever it first came out, of course, in theaters, I remember in Los Angeles, it was in a good 30 or 40 theaters, first-run theaters all over Southern California. And it went then after about a year, and it was on cable, early cable. And after about a year, it came out on VHS and sold well. And when the VHS company's license expired, Don immediately, even before it expired, he had sold it to somebody else. It's been on many, many different labels, but it's never been off the market. Never. They keep doing new editions of it. Is there a bird in here? So that is kind of an immortal thing. You can't get away from being sort of overjoyed that something out there is still performing for you while you're at home frying hamburgers on the grill. You're working all over the world still. It's a wonderful feeling. People are still being entertained by you. You don't have to lift a finger again.
So in 1951, you portrayed Abraham Lincoln in a film series. Talk about working on that project.
Well, for heaven's sake, how many of you were tempted to buy the Scare Factory edition of Phantasm 2? And have any of you, by any chance, looked through the, not very many of you, looked through the special material on that? Normally I get paid a fee for doing special material. They get us all together and we do sound bites and we discuss what it's like making the movie. And they really created about a 40-minute documentary that is a knockout. It's terrific. It's great fun to watch about the making of the movie. Phantasm 2. And I said, you don't have to pay me if you will put a film I made in 1951 for Encyclopedia Britannica, 14-minute film, in which I played Abraham Lincoln for high schools and colleges. The film was made. And it was in the public domain. So by that time, so I did it. But that was my first acting job. And you can see the 24-year-old Angus Scrimm in his first professional performance on the Phantasm 2 special material. That, by the way, I got because the films were written by a wonderful guy named Russ Burton, whom I had first met in a writing class at USC, and we became fast friends. So when he wrote all the little films for the company, which was shooting at the other public studios, he recommended me. I met the director, and I thought, oh yeah, I got a part. And it was a terrific challenge, and exciting to be playing Walter by Abraham Lincoln. When Phantasm 2 came out, I was weird. One of the internet reviewers did a whole article on Phantasm, on it, and his headline was, "Who is the best Abraham Lincoln? Daniel Day-Lewis or Angus Scrimm?" Unfortunately, he never got around to answering the question. But do watch it. Oh, I'd be so tickled if I thought any of you would see it.
So, give us some insight with regards to your character, Mr. Morningside, also known as the Tall Man. What do you think he was trying to accomplish with that?
Who was trying to accomplish what?
What was the Tall Man trying to accomplish?
What was the Tall Man trying to accomplish in Phantasm 4?
Any of the films. Just what was his overarching
Well, he's just a civil servant, actually, sent to Earth to round up corpses, either existing corpses or freshly made corpses, to send back to his planet as slaves. He's purely a functionary. Does that answer your question?
So when you first read the script for Phantasm, what were your initial thoughts?
When I first read what?
The script to Phantasm.
Do you know, when I first read it, it was a totally different script because Don had just come off the success of Kenny and Company. And so he wrote, a good 1/3 of a movie about the two boys. Bill was the head of the bank that his dad and mom had left him when they died. And Michael was his mischievous kid brother. And there were two girls that Bill was crazy about both of them. And it was sort of a romantic kid comedy type thing. But then, after shooting all kinds of scenes with the two girls and the two boys, he started on the part about a mysterious funeral director who came to town. And that started playing so well that he started focusing on that tale and did a lot more of that than he originally planned. And then he put it all together, screened it one night in an invited audience at 20th Century Fox, and realized that his movie was the story of the mysterious mortician from outer space, and eliminated virtually all of the thing he'd spent half a year shooting. I think a bit of it turns up in Phantasm 4. But when I read the script, he had all that initial stuff. And I remember saying to Don, I don't think your movie starts until 1/3 of the way in. And he chortled. But later on, well, see for himself.
Do you prefer playing the villain? Do you enjoy playing the villain better than the hero?
Do I prefer playing the villain
Yeah.
to playing Jebediah? You mean? Oh, I relish them both. I don't really play the tall man. He sort of moved in on me while we were doing the first, and has become so much a part of me that when we start shooting a new film, he just takes over. Now, Jebediah I had to play. He didn't do that. But the tall man is an incredible role to play. He really is so much an individual that he literally plays himself, I would say. I don't do much. Do you believe that?
Now, from your point of view, being part of the Phantasm series, what do you think makes it so special for so many people and why it withstands the test of time?
The Phantasm series, what makes it so special for so many people all over the world is it's incredible. I have thought about it, and I think it's just that it deals, it's made by a master cinema maker who knows how to entertain. I've had many talks with Don. One of the early talks he made when he was just a young filmmaker, he said, you know, you have to surprise the audience every 5 minutes. You have to give them a surprise, to keep them entertained, to keep them glued to the screen. And he does try to do that. He also, I don't know if you've noticed, he gives all his characters terrific entrances. In fact, I think every time a tall man appears on the screen in one of Don's movies, it's kind of a shock, a deliberately set up entrance, which makes him so effective. But I think also the fact that it does deal with death, that puzzling thing, death, which haunts us all constantly, and gives it a kind of physical presence. I think it's fascinating from that point of view, and in somehow reassuring, I don't know. My thought was always that when the film ended, it would establish that the tall man actually was a figure of mercy, a benevolent presence. Somehow I thought they would bring that around, and that would be a good ending, but I don't think Don sees it that way.
Was there any Phantasm film that you enjoyed in particular? Did you have a favorite one to work on?
The first one, as I said, took more than a year, and it was at a time in my life when I was very involved in something rather grievous. It was kind of an escape for me, and a thrill to be doing a horror character. I'd never imagined myself doing something in the vein of Karloff and Lugosi. The second was a great thrill because it was one of the times in my life when there wasn't something ugly going on the outside, something grievous. And it was more money, and it was elating to be involved in a universal picture. And then the third had so much comedy in it, it was hugely enjoyable. And the fourth had introduced Jebediah and gave me a variety of things to do. I really thoroughly enjoyed them all. It's been a lifetime pursuit, practically, of great nourishment.
So tell us how you got involved in the film I Sell the Dead.
Back in 2003, a company called Glass Eye Pix. Do any of you know Glass Eye Pix? They're getting more and more known because I think they've done about 20 or 30 movies now, and every one of them has been a success, either modest or pretty big, like Stake Land and The Innkeepers and House of the Devil. Oh, many, many more, but I Sell the Dead was my 5th film for Glass Eye. And I got involved because the Irish director, Glenn McQuaid, was a Phantasm fan. And because the producer of the company, Larry Fessenden, had used me so often before, and we like each other enormously. So that's how I got that role. I was delighted to play it. It was a little different from the things I'd done before. It's always a joy to get to play something different, like Buddy in Incident on and Off a Mountain Road. It was a great treat to do. And I'm particularly proud of a little 8-minute film that the director, Tony Randall, not the actor, but the director of the second Hellraiser and some of the horror films, did for a series called Beyond Belief. That is, I don't know, Dustin, did you post that on the internet? Somebody, without permission, I'm sure, posted that little episode on the internet. So if you get a chance, Google the Gravedigger's Nemesis. And it's yet another performance. It's quite different from anything I've done before. And it has a wonderful performance by the actor's wife of Will Gear. What is her name? Hedda Ware, as an elderly ghost who haunts this repellent gravedigger who is me.
So in I Sell the Dead, you know you have a music background. Was it actually you playing the violin in the dinner scene?
I'm actually playing that violin, if you can call it play. Yes, I had played the violin in my high school orchestra, but was much more interested in my acting and journalism classes. So I did practice. So I never more than scratched on the violin, but I told Larry Fessenden's son, Jack, who was about 8 years old at the time, and a piano student, that I, too, had studied music, I played the violin. He immediately told his dad, and his dad told McQuaid, Angus plays the violin, let's write a scene for him, play the violin. Well, I hadn't touched the violin in 40 years. So I spent about 5 frantic weeks before we started production with a rented violin and took lessons from Mitch Carlin, who was in the violin section of the LA Philharmonic Orchestra, to try to get a little bit of form back. And the composer, Jeff Grace, wrote a special little violin tune, and I memorized it. I actually played the violin. I think, I would swear, that isn't me entirely you hear on the soundtrack. I think they sweetened it a little bit. But it's basically me, I'm told.
So you do have experience working with young directors like Don. Talk about what it was like working with Glenn McQuaid.
I didn't hear that at all.
Talk about what it was like working with Glenn McQuaid.
McQuaid. Well, McQuaid, I would work for in a minute. He's a great, terrific writer. I thought I Sell the Dead was a rollickingly funny, scary film with terrific performances by Dominic Monaghan and Ron Perlman and Fessenden himself, and a great Irish actress named Brenda Cooney. It was, he's unflappable. He comes prepared. He's inventive, and he loves making movies, so it's playtime.
So back in 1996, you were in a film called Fatal Frame opposite Donald Pleasance. What was it like working with Donald?
I didn't work with Donald Pleasance on that. He wasn't, I went to Rome. It was an Italian picture to do that movie. And Pleasance was shooting, he was in Africa making another picture. So he didn't come in until after I had left. And then he didn't live long after that. I think it was one of his last pictures. I worked with a New York Italian actor named Rick Gianozzi, and palled around with Linnea Quigley, who was also in Rome doing that picture at the same time. It was a joy. It's just such a privilege and such fun to do pictures overseas. I got to be in Rome for about a week and a half, and was paid. Imagine being paid to be in Rome. So I like the film. I'm not sure everybody does, but I think it's a good, tight little mystery. Fatal Frame.
So, you've been quoted as saying you've always wanted to act in a comedy, specifically a drawing room comedy. Now, could you talk about what a drawing room comedy is and why that particularly sort of calls to you?
Watch Turner Classic Movies and you will see drawing room comedies. You will also see the hilarious zany comedies that they made in the 1930s to cheer America up during the Great Depression, with actors like William Powell, Cary Grant, Irene Dunn, Claudette Colbert, James Stewart. Everybody had a turn at doing a zany comedy. The drawing room comedies were more sophisticated. They weren't slapstick. They relied on witty dialogue of the Noel Coward, Bernard Shaw type, about people were elegantly dressed in beautiful drawing rooms, having domestic and romantic contretemps. They were elegant and sophisticated and glamorous. I always thought, when I was a kid and watched those movies, oh, I want to be up there with them doing that. By the time I got a little bit established, nobody did drawing room comedies anymore.
Do you have a drilling sphere sitting on your mantle at your house?
Do I have a sphere?
Yeah.
Oh, I was presented with a little sphere yesterday that one of you kindly made for me. She's here at the moment. I have not one of the authentic ones that was actually used in the picture, but I have a mock-up that was made for Bob Ivy, who was a great Phantasm fan. Bob played the demon cop in Phantasm 4, and he also played the mummy in Baba Hotel. And he did that fantastic stunt with the hearse, where it was hurtling through the air and does a triple twist, and he was in there driving. And when the thing landed, everybody was scared to death he'd been killed. And they went over and they pulled him out, and he was dazed, but he was okay. And they said, Bob, can we get you anything? Is there anything you want? And he said, well, could I have a silver sphere? So they made him a silver sphere. He was taken off to emergency hospital just to be sure he was okay, and he was okay. He kept the sphere for 2 or 3 years and then decided he didn't want it anymore. And I was the rightful possessor of that sphere. So I have that sphere, courtesy of Bob Ivy.
So being an iconic part of horror attending horror conventions, what, in your opinion, is it about the horror genre that has such rabid fans, that has conventions? What is it about the genre that makes it what it is?
My first experience with horror was when I was 12 and went to see a double bill re-release of Frankenstein with Karloff and Dracula with Bela Lugosi, pictures which had been made about 1931. And when I walked into that theater, they had strewn the lobby with cobwebs. I don't know that there was this awesome, icy feeling that I'd never experienced before. And it was addictive. And I loved those movies. I still love those movies. Something about them that just sends chills through your bones. I don't know why that's such a delicious feeling, do you? But it's something that you want to go back and revisit whenever you get the chance. Horror is just as much fun as comedy. It creates a physical sensation in your body that you become used to and want to enjoy again and again and again. Am I touching anything that any of you feel? We should all discuss this.
Now, before we take a few questions from the audience, in doing some research, I saw you at another convention a few years ago, and you actually, you're a big fan of poetry, and you recited The Raven. Do you remember doing that?
Well, I wish I could do that for you, but you know, The Raven is a convoluted poem in which you can get lost. Reused words and phrases. And to do The Raven, I've not done The Raven for 10 years. So I would have to work on it for a week to be able to remember. So I could do Annabelle Lee.
That would be amazing if you could.
As Jimmy Durante would say, so without further ado. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived, whom you may know by the name of Annabelle Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child, and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea. But we loved with a love that was more than love. I and my Annabelle Lee. With a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And that was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabelle Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. A wind blew out of a cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabelle Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And so, all through the night, I lie down by the side of my darling. my life and my bride in the sepulchre here by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea.
We have some time for some questions from the audience. Who has a question for Mr. Scrimm? No questions?
I think we're all taken back by that performance.
Yes, very much so. All right, well, since there are no... Okay.
I have more of a request.
It's more a request than a question. If you would just say your iconic line of "boy" for us. Hello again. We touched a little bit about this yesterday, but maybe some of the other people here might be interested. Any notes about the upcoming Ravager film that you can share with us?
You know, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The new Phantasm movie that's coming out.
Oh, the new one, yes?
Yeah. Can you share us some information about it? You were telling me the other day Reggie was
Well,
playing
no,
the part.
I've not seen it. I've not seen the full of it. Don's keeping it under total wraps. They're still working on the special effects. David Hartman, the man who wrote and directed the film, a great Phantasm fan, by the way, is also one of the leading special effects men and cartoonists, I think, in Hollywood. And he has sort of, over the last 5 years, he and Don have been working closely on the film, but sporadically, because David has all these other obligations that had to take precedence. So it's been a long time in being produced. We took more than a year to do the first Phantasm. This one has taken 4 or 5 years. And now, David is so determined that it be impressive that he's using all his skills working on special effects. So it should look terrific. I know I did a bit of green screen work, which I'm told he's really made something phenomenal of. I can't wait to see it, but I don't know when I'm ever going to get to see it. Reggie hasn't seen it. Reggie is prominently featured in the movie, probably more than any of the other regulars. And he and Gigi, his wife, were complaining to me the other day, well, you know, we haven't seen it. So there's not much I can tell you. And Don will want me to anyway.
You have another question?
Hello, there we go. How much did you and Don collaborate on the character of the tall man? Or was there much influence you put into that?
The character of the tall man. We didn't have any preliminary discussions. I think the first scene we shot was the scene in the mausoleum when Jody, Bill Thornbury, is snooping around looking at some of the crypts. And he kneels down to inspect one a little more closely, and a hand is slapped on his shoulder. And the tall man saying, "The funeral is about to begin, sir." Well, Don totally choreographed that and gave me the exact reading of the line he wanted. It was meticulously planned, so that was my first experience of doing the tall man. Then he also pretty much spoon-fed me the next 2 or 3 things. One of the early things we did was a scene where Mike is pulling the curtains in the house, he's all by himself, and he pulls back one curtain, and there on the other side of the window was the tall man who burst through at him. And that was choreographed also. That was difficult to shoot. I think we only had about 3 of those fake sugar pane glasses to break through so you don't cut yourself. And Michael, little rascal, got a fit of the giggles. We rehearsed several times without the pain. But every time I would burst through at him, he would burst into giggles. So we were a long time shooting that scene. And finally we used all 3 pains, and finally he managed to contain himself and we got a take. But then, as shooting went on, the tall man, as I told you earlier, just sort of moved in and took over and played himself. And that's how that played out.
All right, we have time for one more.
So I'd like to go back to your career as a writer of liner notes. You say that you attended several recording sessions, and what was the most memorable experience you had when you were observing these great artists recording?
Oh, I have so many. Nat King Cole was always a joy to be around. How many of you remember Nat? You know Nat King Cole? Oh, what a grand singer he was, and what a gent, what a nice gent. I went to this, he did an album called Nat King Cole Sings, George Shearing Plays, the blind English pianist. And I was so happy to be present for that. It was a great collaboration. I met Nat in the elevator after it was over, and he asked me between 2 songs which one did I think should be in the album, because he had they had recorded more than they needed, and so I told him frankly, and that's the one that wound up in the album. So I always felt I had a hand in that, and then I wrote the note for it. Ella Fitzgerald was wonderful to watch. I was told, don't go to her because she's very shy. You can come if you'll just sit there and not make yourself known. So I got to watch her record some of the great old standards, like Deep Purple. And she sat very demurely and quietly by herself. And the musicians whom she knew would come and say hi, but I didn't ever get to actually meet Ella. I did several Nancy Wilson albums, and that Nancy, she was delightful. Sinatra I never met. He only allowed his buddies, his chums, to come to his recording sessions. And the musicians, all of them he knew because he'd been recording for years and years and years. So I didn't get to, and I didn't attend a Dean Martin session, though I wrote several of Dean's albums. I was present for a jazz recording by Cannonball Adderley, the great saxophonist, and his brother Nat, great trumpeter, in which they recorded a Joe Zawinul song that was a big hit at the time. I was there for that. I could go on and on forever about this. It was a joyous time, great fun.
We have one more?
Yes. If you could visit your 25-year-old version of yourself, what advice would you give yourself?
What advice I would give to any 25-year-old who wants to be an actor is, don't let yourself be deflected by anything. Concentrate on that. Make it your primary goal. What was it Ruth Gordon said? The great Broadway actress and screenwriter. She was not an attractive girl at all, and she wanted to be a stage actress. And when she first went to New York, she was told, oh honey, you go back to Ohio. You're just not pretty. You'll never make it. And she just kept plugging away. And her advice was, don't face the facts. Never face the facts. And of course, she didn't, and she became one of the great figures in both theater and music. But I would say persistence pays. That's another great thing to remember. But don't let yourself get sidetracked. When I was at USC, there were so many really talented kids in the group that I worked with, and hardly anybody made it. A comedian named Joe Flynn, you may remember from McHale's Navy, did well. Marvin Kaplan, who was in the Alice series, and, who was in Mad, Mad, Mad World, and many, many things. He persisted and he made it. But others immediately got married and started having kids and had shoes to buy and dentists to pay for. And, so they took teaching jobs, and they never really got back to their initial dream, which was to act. So don't let anything deflect you. Don't let drugs or alcohol or family obligations or anything else. Don't be distracted by anything but your primary goal, which is to make it as an actor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand up and give a round of applause to the living legend, Angus Scrimm.